Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to Major League Tenacity. I am your host, Dave Robertson, and today we are talking to Dr. Nettrice Gaskins. So if you caught my video about 2 weeks ago, I responded to Jerry Rig Everything, aka Zach Nelson, when he was criticizing an art exhibit in the San Francisco Airport Art Museum. I ended up reaching out to Dr. Gaskins and wanted to kind of get her opinion on some of the controversy surrounding the art exhibit and get a little bit more knowledge about her and her work. And yeah, I'm not going to talk too much more, so let's just jump into it. Hey, Dr. Gaskins, thank you for joining me today. I know your schedule is probably really busy, so taking this time out of that is really important to me, and I appreciate it. I just want to start the response to Zach, or what is it, Jerry Everything's video, excuse me, was really negative to me because of the initial claims of that you aren't an artist because you use AI. But as I did more research on you and looked into your background, you really have a long history with technology and artificial intelligence and art. This isn't new to you. So with how long you've been using these tools and integrating your work and art with AI, this recent explosion of generative AI, did you really see it coming, or were you familiar with all that, with all the tools already, or, because you kind of used them before they were cool?
I did know kind of when the tools were created because I was teaching. I taught AP, Advanced Placement Computer Science Principles, to art high school students. And I knew I had to teach it in a way that wouldn't make them drop the class. So it couldn't be forward. It had to have an art, at every unit had to have an art theme. So I actually have all that material and since shared with other teachers who are teaching that. But I think in Unit 7 is evidence, this is 2016, 2017, that I was predicting what was coming, because in that slide, there's an AI-generated portrait of a student of mine in the middle of the slide that I used the old AI, the old model, whatever, for 2017. It was new. And then I had all the big ideas for that at that time. And then I had like a box that said Deep Dream. And then I was like, generative AI is coming. Like, it was a little, so I said, I was calling it even then. And that's from 2017 to 2021. So for 4 years, there was no prompt-based AI. And 2022 was when it became public, where people started. So from 2017, but then 2015 is kind of when Google jumped in the game. And we can go all the way back to the early 70s when the first generative AI art was made. So, yeah.
I think, just because AI art's kind of gotten popular now, like in the recent 2020s, 2022, 2023, the text prompts, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, stuff like that, they don't really understand the history of AI art. So could you tell us a bit more about, previous history of AI art, and what's the difference between how those systems worked versus, just typing a prompt now?
Well, Harold Cohen, who was considered to be like an AI, one of the first AI artists, he was training his own system. So he was basically wanting I think it was called Aaron, Aaron, and he wanted this system to help collaborate with him. So he trained it in how he would make art. He wanted to see if the machine could make art like him and then collaborate with him to make art. So he did that late 60s, early 70s, and then started like publicly kind of doing it from the 70s on. So he's, he didn't need a large data set. You don't need a large data set, or you don't need. Yeah, and the other artists have experimented. I know Chantel Martin collaborated with a MIT computer science student to do a show that was in Boston, Mind of the Machine or something like that. And at first, Chantel, who does a lot of black and white drawings, they trained the template was a 300 drawings to the machine to learn so it could draw like Chantel. And then it would have half the gallery with Chantel's drawings and the other half was the machines. But Chantel, right. And I think they were just, it was like an experiment. But in the end, I had wrote a piece for R21 to cover the show because I was writing for R21 already. She was but then she, years later, wanted to add to it about how she didn't like the process. She's not, Chantel Martin was a computer scientist. She wasn't an AI artist until she worked with this student. And she felt that the more people were interested in the machine than they were in her work. So we added, so R21's editor added her to my article, on her work, added her feedback. And it was not for her, it wasn't positive. Like once that show was over, she went back to just doing her thing, which was, drawing, and she was using iPad. So it's not like she was doing digital drawings, but it wasn't AI generated. But the way the collaboration went, I felt like if she herself had had the knowledge and trained the model and did the thing, it would have been a different experience than just her offloading all that to computer science.
So you mentioned the culture war earlier. After the video that Zach put out went viral, a lot of the comments, again, I hate to go back to this, especially those ones on Reddit, were really toxic. Did you get a sense that the people were attacking your work because of the work and them just not liking AI? Or was it coming from someplace else?
Well, it's an artistic community, though. That's why I meant culture war. That backlash, many of the people in that thread were not artists or part of the arts community. Some were, and there's some are. Obviously, there's some people suing. There's people, clearly not happy about the development, and for different reasons too. So some it's about the environment, and that's very valid, about water usage and all the some environmental climate related issues, and some about copyright and IP, or they want more guardrails to be up so that they feel more comfortable using AI. So it's all different. But some of the people, especially the ones that were trolling me, coming to my website and then messaging me, those weren't artists. They were not part of the art community. And I could tell because it was talking about that, not me. It's like they were spewing words that they had seen somewhere else. The initial guy that did that didn't care. He had a thing he was doing. He was going to get a lot of attention. He tapped into this community, or he tapped into the Reddit community. He knew he was going to get attention for it. So that's what he did. It's the timing. It's the show he did. It was all the, he didn't go to MoMA. He didn't go to, where they have art in their collection already, like permanent collection. He didn't do any of that stuff. It was already in the airport and decided to do that. So that's why I didn't. So wait a minute, I know what this is. And then I read some of the stuff in the, and I said, okay, I'm never coming back here again to this. And then other people would message me. Like I had a colleague message me and say that night and say, 1, I'm sending you love, but 2, don't go to Reddit. Don't go to Reddit, don't read it, don't, and then went on LinkedIn on, day later, whatever, 2 days later, and said, keep Dr. Gaskins' name at your mother loving mouth, like in all caps on LinkedIn. So I was like, okay, so here's this. And a lot of the pushback and people tagging me was, I know her work. She's real. She's a real artist and all that. I don't know if a lot of those people in there really cared. I think they had their own agenda, or they had their own thing that they were doing. So it didn't really much matter whether I was real or not, and whether or not I even knew that it was art. I think this had their own agenda, and their agenda is all AI art out, even though they're really only talking about 2022 to the present. Because when you say someone came at me attacking me about a piece that I had done in 2019 and saying, well, what was your prompt? I said, well, I didn't use a prompt. What do you mean? I said, well, I didn't use a prompt. It's prompt-based technology for AI. Well, then it's not AI. It absolutely is AI generated.
I think the big distinction that you made between, say, prompt-based AI versus, more complex personal models is really important. I don't think a lot of people understood that there was an era of AI art or AI, altered art before text to image. Um, can you go into a little bit more detail about that technical shift? Um, because I don't think that most people, thinking about anything before 2021, 2022, were doing anything. Like most people weren't doing anything with prompt without, unless it was, I mean, I don't know. The most people nowadays know prompts. So like how were people like how were folks getting those images generated?
Well, I think that, like, as I mentioned, Howard Cohen and artists like him, and there were a few probably after that, but he's the one, he was an artist before. He decided he wanted to tap into the AI, thing that was happening in the late 60s before the winter, and he created his own system. By the time it got picked up again for development was by companies like Google, but they were releasing their code to the public, so the public started developing tools for people to use for free. Everything was for free, in 2016. Like music, there was an AI generator for music in 2016. And coming out of Google, there were all these different things happening. There were no prompt-based tools at that point, but these were AI tools. And so instead of it was more around style. So you apply a style or the system learns from these inputs and then tries to create, more a different type of instrument or a different type of look. But it wasn't about data. It was using your own input to do an output. So prior to prompts, that's what the name of the game was, is that you had to give the machine all the input so that it can make output. And then you work with that and can go back and forth and things like that. So up until 2022, that was how generative AI, what we know now as generative AI, then computer vision or whatever names they were calling it back then, was. And so that's how it worked.
So I think that makes me want to lean into like the question of the artist's hand. The biggest argument against AI art nowadays is that it's soulless or that it doesn't have as much human interaction. But you've you've said, you've had researchers look at your work and say, oh, this is Nettrice's work, this is Dr. Gaskins' work. How do you ensure that your artist's hand comes through the algorithm?
Well, I think, a lot of research, there was no research for like chunks of time. So it was called AI winters. There were times when there just wasn't any development. And then suddenly Google had a whole arm of Google was doing AI, a whole arm of Microsoft, a whole arm. So it's corporate driven, obviously, but they were releasing these tools out into the public, or these algorithms, these systems. And I don't think the public knew about it. So the public is not computer science savvy, or they're not reading up on the newsletters, or they're not in the circles and having conversations with people, so they didn't know that was happening. When in 2019, someone had blogged and it went kind of viral. I was at the airport and I'm like, oh, this is kind of viral, and went on to Boing Boing. And then some guy came at me and said, well, I was using Deep Dream generator and calling it Deep Dream. And he said, well, that's not Deep Dream. Deep Dream looks psychedelic and it's dogs and cats and snakes and whatever. Your stuff's not that. Send me the link. So I sent the person the link, and then he came back to me and said, well, that's Gaddis' algorithm, and it's this. And I was like, oh, there's a name for the algorithm? He's guessing. And I looked him up, and he was an Adobe researcher. So he had a paper, and now since then, he has been a big proponent of AI art and making the point that AI is not the artist. He's this guy, Aaron Hertzman. But one of the things he said to me, which was I was hearing often, I'm using that tool and my output doesn't look like yours. So what are you doing that makes your output different? And I'm like, it looks different. I wasn't really paying attention, but I kept hearing it. Some random person would see my work and go, why use that tool? My work doesn't look like that. So Aaron was like, well, the thing that I think is happening is the reason why I didn't recognize it is because the artist's hand is taking over the process. So it's possible that the artist's hand can actually take over the process when I'm just applying the style. Apparently so. I was even hearing, oh, your output's improving. And I was doing the same, what I thought was the same thing. And then I realized there's more to this than just clicking a button. And then I said, well, what am I doing that's different? Because these people seem to be very upset. Like I'm hiding a secret. And what's the secret? Why come your images look like that? And I'm just like, and then a Smithsonian curator said, hey, we would like to exhibit your work. And I'm like, what? So I said, there's something going on. He said, so Aaron used the word artist hand. And then I realized possibly that there's more because I'm an artist. So there's choices that I make, and using the tool, choices I'm making that artists make from their body of knowledge, from what they know. Whether it's colors or different visual elements, styles, there's a process. I started collaging, not just collaging, but I started doing some compositing in Photoshop. I was using computer code to make my style. So I would hover my hand and draw over the sensor and use that output as the style for the portrait. And so I was just trying every little thing. And that was 2015, we had a lot of snowstorms. So school was not at, and I was doing all this experimentation with this stuff. So it makes a lot of sense. And at the time I just wasn't, I think everybody's doing that. The other part was I noticed that when I go to these communities using these tools, there wasn't a lot of representation of African-American or Black and Brown people. And I thought, well, I want to focus on what's missing. And so that's another layer. So I'm coming at it from there in terms of representation. So a lot of that was missing from the scene all the way through. And then even when the lawsuits started to come, one artist in particular that's suing, we were all got on to this meeting with the US Copyright Office to talk about all day, half a day, about all of our concerns from all the photographers, Yale, Getty, Adobe everyone was in there talking about Stable Diffusion. And then they gave me a slot toward the end. And at that point, nobody Black was talking, was invited to talk or had signed up to talk. So I was feeling kind of dejected by the time it came to me. I'm like, I'm the only Black person all half a day talking. And then one of the women who's suing on Twitter said, well, I like Nettrice's work. I just wish she would do what she did 30 years ago. So acknowledgement that the work is different. But that's just one example. This particular person's lawsuit is some other people are trying to copying that artist style. Not me, but somebody else. And that is their agenda. We don't want you taking our jobs. We don't want you taking and using these tools to copy what I do. And so the acknowledgement, but there's this thing of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And in that bathwater is a bunch of artists who are using the tools like Howard Cohen did or others did, not to copy some other artist's work, but to create something more towards what their work is. And so just like people don't know that the first AI art was 1972, they don't know that you can make AI art without prompts. Those people don't know, they don't understand, or that you can use art knowledge to make your work unique. Those are things that people are just not in those conversations. The conversations are just here, kind of what happened in that one incident on Reddit.
So previously in my search of your research and your excuse me, your work, you've used the term techno-vernacular creativity. Like you've compared it to how musicians like Prince or Jay Dilla use drum machines, not just hitting play, but innovating. Can you explain how AI art is similar to just like how a musician might remix a song, or sample something?
Well, when I did was paid to talk to Adobe researchers a few years ago for 20 minutes to pay you some money to talk to them about your work. And that's when I knew these companies are paying attention to the work I do too. And at the end, somebody said, well, what happens if someone steals from your work? I said, I want them to. And he was, I want them to, because of the dearth of this type of content. I want them to take it. Um, I've had that. I've had people in the Midjourney official page challenge me and say, "Well, I'm not an artist, and I can do what you do." All right, okay, good luck. And then half a day later, I can't do that. Uh, like I'm okay with you trying, but you're missing a piece, a huge piece of it. The reason why my output looks the way that it looks is because I'm doing something else, and that something else isn't AI. That's why I keep saying AI is just a tool. If I just want to, I can just go in there and type Martin Luther King and then get a bunch of images that look like Martin Luther King. But I don't want that. I want Martin Luther King with logarithmic spirals. Or I might put a math equation in, which I've done. There is a Martin Luther King portrait that's textured with math. But those are choices that I'm making to experiment to see how far this can go. It's not about copying. It's not about replacing. It's about doing something new. And that's the part that Black folks especially should know about. And so I often liken, when I talk about techno-vernacular creativity, I often talk about how Black and brown folks engage technology that might be different or unique from mainstream technology. So we automatically go to music, and we have tons of examples of Black people using machines, from Prince and the Lynn drum, Roger Lynn, who invented it, but like Prince was doing something totally different with my machine. And then we hear Purple Rain, and then there's the Lynn drum. And people, oh, it's innovative. Or Jay Dilla, whose drum machines in the Smithsonian, who created a whole time different sound, rhythm pattern that nobody was doing before using a machine. So we have examples of us innovating with machines, not AI, but machines in ways that weren't done before. There's a whole book called Dilla Time about that innovation, and he was using machines, but it wasn't about the machine. It's about what Jay Dilla was doing to the machine, or what Prince was doing to the machine in order to produce output that sounded different. And Prince was experimenting. I mean, people say, oh, he was anti-technology. No, he was anti, don't take my stuff, or use it the way I don't want it to be used. That was different than, but he, like, behind the scenes, he was doing innovative stuff with technology. He was supporting people. He was giving money to computer science projects before he died. So we have the assumption that Black folks don't engage. My mother was a computer programmer. When I was a kid, I was like, well, nobody else's parent is a computer programmer. That's odd. And she wanted me to be an artist. So somehow the two came together, and there you have it. But it was very rare to find a Black woman computer programmer, unless we're talking about Hidden Figures. And that was, 10 years or 20 years before that, before her. So oh my God, Black women in computer science. Oh, but they've been doing that for years. So we have all these outliers, and African-American included, who are engaging technology in really creative and innovative ways. And we don't celebrate it. So for the first time, and there have been times, one of the things, there's this guy called Beeple, I don't know if it's Beeple or another guy, Mario Klingman, called Everydays. Every day for 2 years, Klingman, or I think it's Klingman, but Beeple might be the same person, decided they were going to make an AI art piece every day for a period of time, and then made this thing, and then auction for millions of dollars. So people auction because it was the novelty of it. He was one of the first out there. He wasn't Cohen. Cohen had, by meanwhile, when that happened, I think he was almost passed away. But that was a thing. AI art was auctioning for millions of dollars 5 years ago, and entering the art world. And the art was very exclusive. So a lot of Black folks, there was no Black folks in the conversation about what was happening at the biggest art institutions in the world. Which the other piece of this, and I think it's very important, is to, no person gets to decide if something's art or not. And this process involves, there's the artist and their intent, There's the viewer who's interpreting the art, and then there's validation by the art worlds. So the system, like the curators, the critics, the galleries and collectors who contextualize and present it, and ultimately anybody collectively shaping the definition over time. So an individual viewer decides what resonates personally, but the outsiders, the people, the institutions, and the experts kind of guide the broader cultural acceptance. And what's very clear now is that curators are doing that. They're beginning to, or have been for the last few years, saying that AI, when this artist does it, is art. And hey, she's Black. Oh, and hey, we have this Afrofuturism exhibit about the future. And so, these kind of things come together. So that's when I hear people responding, and then I give them a little fact, they become quiet because they didn't know, or they didn't even think about it.
Oh, since we're talking about that, I wanted to talk about the whole concept of Afrofuturism, because folks like myself, I consider myself something of a Pan-Africanist, and a lot of the Afrofuturist genre and aesthetic are things that people that I know and people like myself are interested in. How would you define it, and what would you say is important about Afrofuturism, especially when it deals with AI?
Well, I think there are different waves. Like the guy that coined it, Mark Derry, in the mid 1990s. I had lunch with him. He didn't want to be the Afrofuturism guy. He just needed to call it something. When he wrote his piece for the Village, I think it was for his book, Flame Wars, he just needed, okay, there's a zeitgeist going on right now in the, Sun Ra and all this other stuff. I just saw an Erykah Badu performance that might have happened this year. It was very Sun Ra, clearly Sun Ra. So it's current, Sun Ra kind of left a blueprint because I think he applied for a NASA fellowship, didn't get it, but he was not playing. It wasn't just music. So that was the first wave. And so Derry needed to call it something. He saw a zeitgeist around cyber culture and cyberspace, and he saw Black folks in it. And so he called it Afrofuturism, for lack of a better thing, and it took hold. And then there was a second wave. And then that second wave, there's a bunch of other artists and writers and scholars who are thinking about Black folks in the future that is theirs to call, not for others to erase or not imagine. And so then, Alondra Nelson wrote one of the text you go to for early Afrofuturism, she wrote. And she was in the Biden administration for a minute, and she's, in science and technology, she's just been a scholar over the years, kind of instrumental in Afrofuturism. And at Princeton University, there was this big meeting with all the people, and not all the people, but most of the people were in the room. And I was in the room, and all these kind of famous people were in the room. And then Alondra got up for her keynote, and she was going on about the different waves of Afrofuturism from the beginning with her, Mark Derry, and others. And then she's like, then we have wave number 3, like the Afrofuturism 3.0, and that's Dr. Gaskins. And I was like, what? And then people were looking at me, and and I was like, whoa. And that was her kind of passing the flag. And she's like, because it's about, okay, if we're saying we're in the age of AI, whether it's Internet of Things or, and if we're there, and you can see how corporate stuff is going in every single case along the years since cyberspace became a thing, we've always been excluded. And then come in with the ways that we do it. And then, so there's another wave. And, AI is so, it's everywhere now, unlike like the internet was, the AI is, education, and people are concerned in education, so kind of in music, in visual art, in performance, whatever it is, it's money, and I think that this next wave is that thing that I was kind of saying in Afrofuturism 2.0, the book. I was talking about Afrofuturism and the web 3.0. So now we're talking about a semantic web, or a web that's more what we call AI today. which isn't really AI, it's machine learning or deep learning, but still, I didn't have the name for it, but I just called it Web 3.0. So it's, you plant a flag and you say, okay, now it's not social media, it's AI. And then you look at that flag and you look at who comes and who convenes around that. And then you're able to sort of get a sense of the zeitgeist, just the way Mark Derry was noticing back in 1994, 95. And so we're coming to that again, and you're seeing a bunch of other African Americans who are in that space. And, I was talking to another, Stephanie Dinkins, who had the first Guggenheim Fellowship doing AI last year. And she's a professor in New York. And I was just like, I'm naming people on, we need to write a book or something to capture the moment. So there we are again, doing what Derry was doing in 1990s and Alondra Nelson. And here we are in this wave. So Afrofuturism isn't about a style, because there's so many different styles. It's about this idea that we engage with technology and craft our futures the way we see it, not the way Minority Report or, the way that, mainstream outlets see it, or mainstream writers and authors and creators see it. It's different. I this morning posted something about a portrait that I've been involving for 5 years of D'Angelo. And it was a portrait that a lot of his people messaged me about. You captured him. And it was using neural style transfer. It was using deep learning before prompts when I made that image. And I just composited it. But to hear from his former manager, his former girlfriends, started following me on social media. You captured him. And I'm just like, you captured who he is. They know him. I don't. But somehow, because it was about the music, it was about my experience growing up, becoming an adult with that music, was somehow making its way into the AI. And in the process of making the portraits, it was resonating with the public. And so that is kind of that zeitgeist kind of conversation. We can have that conversation as it relates to AI, but we also have to be aware of all the different issues as well. How it's used to surveil Black people, how it's used to, create data centers in poor areas where oftentimes Black people are, not all the time, but how it's used in ways that are not beneficial, that are bad. But then we stay in the bad and we never look at the good and the beneficial stuff enough. And I think that's one of the, maybe it's, and there are examples of Black folks using AI technology for good stuff, for health, for, and even climate to some degree. It's kind of weird, but creating solutions that wouldn't be as climate, trying to destroy the world, instead trying to work with AI to help the world. And so I think we need to have those conversations too in our groups, in our communities. There's something else as it relates to Afrofuturism that I want to mention, and kind of came from, so the Futures exhibition at the Smithsonian was 2021. And that was the Arts and Industries building, which is forever being renovated. So it's not open, but for a moment, they opened it to the public in 2021 and had this humongous exhibition, and they wanted it to be inclusive. So they had Black folks who were doing AI in that show, including me. With me, they wanted me to produce 11 portraits of featured futurists, what they call featured futurists, so Octavia Butler. And then some people I didn't really know much about, like I knew their names and they were in my books when I was in school, but Floyd McKissick, he is a proto-Afrofuturist. And the reason, so Floyd McKissick, if you don't know, and he was they gave me a list of featured futurists. So I had to create a portrait of Floyd McKissick. So I had to find out more about him, more than what I knew. And so Floyd, he used to be the leader of the Congress of Racial Equality in the late 1960s. He was the leader. He eventually left CORE, and he launched a plan to build a city called Soul City in North Carolina. And it was intended to be for all people, but it placed an emphasis on providing opportunities for the underserved. So there was a whole plan, there was a whole bunch of stuff. It was a failed project in many ways, but I had to create a plan for how I was going to do these portraits using AI. And then I thought it would be a good idea to use the plans and the blueprints and stuff for Soul City, the posters, as the styles for his portrait. So when I did the Floyd McKissick, I was thinking, okay, this is kind of Afrofuturist. He's imagining a kind of city that hasn't existed before, maybe like a Tulsa, but more business technological focus in the 1970s. And so here I am in 2021, given permission to use this photo of Floyd McKissick, and then using his plans, I used generative AI to create his portrait. And then I did that for Octavia Butler, and I did that for all the other people, Buckminster Fuller, Alexander Graham Bell, Helen Keller. They were all in that list. And then at the bottom of the list, you. So they had my name at the bottom of the list. So I had to do my own portrait that was, to my surprise, in the lobby when I walked into the museum. I was really emotional. Didn't expect that. You're looking at my, right when I walked in the door, it was press day. When I walked in the door, I sat there trying to keep my wits about me. But this was a futures exhibition, focusing on the future, and it was inclusive. So I think it was a moment, and I think it was captured. It was in the New York Times. It was everywhere. But I think the fact that it was inclusive and that it was carving a space for our visions for the future using the different technologies, including AI, was kind of a moment. And I wasn't the only AI artist in the show. Stephanie Dinkins had her bot, not the only one, next to my Octavia Butler piece. And not the only one is trained to, I think the data she used was some Toni Morrison's books like Sula, and then interviews with her family members. So she trained her own bot and using data that she collected, and then they use that to train a machine. And you go up to the bot and you talk to it, it talks back to you. So she customized or created a custom AI for her project. So again, it's not, so these, I was talking to Stephanie and saying, we should collect that, get out, because she was doing that too. She had these, she was funded by a Ford Foundation, and she had these big meetings with people like me and others in the room to talk about what AI can do for us. So one of the curator for the Women of Afrofuturism exhibition, Ingrid, she was at the meeting I was at in New York. So, we were there to talk about AI. And that was before the pandemic. So it's been at least 6 or 7 years. So there's names here. Floyd McKissick, folks like Floyd, Sun Ra, they're setting the blueprint for Afrofuturism and for our use of technology in ways that fit ourselves, who we are.
Well, I think we've seen studies where a lot of these foundational models don't always favor things for persons of color, especially Black people. And, many times when there's an intersection of technology and, Black people, our usage of the technology, especially like in this instance of your usage of AI for your art, isn't seen as legitimate as other groups. When it comes to how you've used AI, what has been your experience specifically with tweaking these models and seeing how that output has affected your work?
Well, one thing, these foundational models are biased. No one disagrees with that. The source of the bias is humans. There are a bunch of papers out there. One of the papers says they use all the popular AI image generators, and then they put in one word. So if you type in lawyer, you get a bunch of men, particularly a bunch of white men across the board. I thought Midjourney, so I said, I'm going to do the same experiment. I read the paper. The other word they used was felon, just one word. And so I guess you can think what you're going to get if you type in felon. DALL-E, which is ChatGPT now, gave me 3 apes and a Black man. And I screenshot it, and I had a talk at Bloomberg, and I brought that in. It was with the Black community to talk about things like AI, and I showed that picture. I've seen some very disturbing things. And then somebody said, well, what do? You're using those foundational models that are biased. I said, but there's knowledge, human knowledge. So with the lawyer situation, I know the name of a Black woman lawyer that I put in the field, in the chat. I said Constance Baker Motley, not lawyer. So it was very specific, and it gave me a picture, some portraits of Constance Baker Motley. But your average person doesn't know who Constance Baker Motley is. They're not history buffs like me, or they don't know. But that's one answer. And so some of these papers say human intervention is how you counter some of these foundational models. So I stayed on that. And the prompt side of AI, I talked about deep dream generator and deep style. On the prompt side, you're dealing with these very popular platforms that are biased. And so how can I use these platforms to get output that isn't offensive or conventional? And that is in the kind of the visual language, or having some idea of a Black woman lawyer that could counter the bias in the machine and the model. We need to realize that there's a new term that I'm kind of kicking around, AI whispering. If you haven't seen it, there's the new liberal arts term, AI whispering. And then suddenly OpenAI's got a tool called Whisper. Whispering is you're not reliant on the machine. You're understanding. So if you look that up after we talk, look it up, you're going to get OpenAI. But then there's this whole idea of human beings being able to use these tools, but the output is not based on the machine alone. So the humanity, the artist's hand, or whatever emerges. So I think here's the other piece that I found out talking to Google. You can't fix the model. You can't fix them. The more you try, the paper they send me, the more you try to fix these models, the worse it gets, actually. I don't know if you remember when Meta tried to introduce AI profiles on social media, maybe. And then they started snitching on the developers. I'm AI, and these are white guys that are, they just started. I know I'm supposed to be a Black woman, but the person that made me is a white guy. They just started snitching and they removed them. It's going to happen every single time. You can fix it from ground up. So then the question is, how do we get the resources to build these new models that are not foundational? Stephanie Dinkins has the Guggenheim. She has Ford Foundation or Ford, and she has all these funder. But what about the student over here or whatever? Where do they get the resources to be able to build and use models to counter the foundational models? And that really becomes a question. So how do we learn how to do that? How do we do that in a way that isn't repeating what's already been done? So we can't use that foundational model. Or you got to have 40 years of history experience or art experience and then know how to prompt it right so that you get something that's not conventional or typical or biased or whatever that may be. And I think that's the part that is the new challenge, the new digital divide, so to speak.
I really appreciate you giving me the time today. I think we can wrap it up here, and I look forward to seeing what comments we have come out of this. Thank you very much, Dr. Gaskins. All right, so that was it. I hope you enjoyed the video today. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. I look forward to making more content for you all in the future. And that's it. Catch you next time.